loud. All right, now we're rolling. Before we start, though, a couple of items. I've got you all muted in the audience so that we don't have background sounds that interfere with Bill's talk. And as I said, we'll be getting rolling shortly with that. We have our website at www.hiller.org where you can find out about what's going on with the museum, as well as online activities and Hangar talks that are coming up in the future. In 2 weeks from today, on July 1st, we will have Heyman Tam, who is a award-winning photographer who's done a lot of traveling around Europe doing aviation photography, and he's got a talk on the aviation museums of Europe, and that's going to be in 2 weeks. So Heyman Tam is going to be here for that on July 1st. If you go to our website on our Hiller at Home page, we have information about upcoming Hangar talks and then other activities and downloadable things and make and take projects that you can do at home, stories about the aircraft in our gallery, and our virtual invention lab, which is a live hosted Zoom session in which you download a project activity that we make together in about a 30-minute time frame. And we're doing those every Wednesday, Saturday, and Sunday at 2 o'clock. So that's our virtual invention lab. And you can find the information for that on our website as well. The big announcement we have is we are going to be reopening the museum here at San Mateo County. The health orders have been modified in the last couple of days. And so following the state guidelines, we're able to reopen the museum, which we are going to do not this weekend, but the following weekend on Saturday, June 27th. So finally, our doors will reopen again. There will be some changes to how we have to operate the museum in a socially distanced manner because there is still a pandemic on. But we're at least able to have the museum open and you'll be able to come in and enjoy the museum. That'll be starting on Saturday, June 27th. And again, all of this information you can find on our website at www.hiller.org. So I am very pleased to have tonight with us a guest who has been to the Hiller Aviation Museum before. He's an accomplished author on aviation subjects. And I would like to welcome and introduce to you with his talk about attacking the Pacific Coast, Bill Yenne.
Hi, I'm happy to be joined by all of you folks out there. I'm an experienced talker when it comes to speaking to rooms full of people down here at the Hiller, but this is my my first time doing it via Zoom, and my mastery of the technology leaves a lot to be desired. A little bit about me: I'm an aviation writer. I've written a lot of books about aviation history, which is what brought me to the Hiller on numerous occasions. I also write a lot about the Second World War. This current book is one about the fear of the Japanese invasion of the West Coast, a fear of Japanese attacks against the West Coast, which was very pervasive after Pearl Harbor. So the situation on the West Coast was after Pearl Harbor, immediately after Pearl Harbor, that same day was one of fear. And out of that, we had West Coast politicians panicking and overreacting and making decisions with unintended consequences. And does that sound familiar? But in that case, in those days, the unintended consequences were fairly dire if you happened to be an American of Japanese descent. But I'll not get into all of that. We could spend an hour or two on that. But what I'm talking about tonight is the fear, this pervasive fear on the West Coast. People woke up on Sunday morning, December 7th, and what they learned was that the naval and air forces of the Empire of Japan, to quote FDR, had reached halfway across the Pacific and had destroyed the Pacific Fleet at Pearl Harbor. And what the fear was was that the Japanese could reach the other half of the way across the Pacific Ocean. Now, people had seen in the newsreels what happened when enemy planes bombed a city. The picture on your screen now is of a Dornier bombing.
Bill, let me interrupt.
London.
You're not
Yes?
screen sharing at the
Beg
moment.
your pardon?
You need to start your screen share.
Oh, okay.
You're waiting for your slides, but yeah, you need to do the whole screen sharing thing.
Okay, okay, let me try to find that icon. I'm not finding
Always
that
fun with Zoom.
Zoom.
We'll give you a minute to find it.
screen share.
Go to Zoom.
Go to Zoom. Where's Zoom? I have a young person helping me here, and we're having a hard time. Yeah, that bar that you had with screen share on it has just disappeared completely. Okay, there's that one. Okay, so this is the one.
I got it.
Okay,
Awesome.
okay, okay. Do we have it now?
Yes.
Okay, good. We've
You're
got
looking good. Well done.
Okay, so this is what people were afraid of. This is what they saw in their newsreels. They saw the Germans bombing London, and they figured that if the Germans could bomb London, and the Japanese could bomb Pearl Harbor, then they could bomb Seattle or San Francisco or San Diego or even L.A. So you know, people were a little bit concerned. So it was. So it fell to one man to try to sort all of this out. That was General John DeWitt, commander of the Western Defense Command, a man who is, and again, we could talk about this all night, but he was probably the most unsuited for the task of any general in the Army. He was, in fact, the 2 days after Pearl Harbor, he went down to City Hall in San Francisco, and he laid out this elaborate story about how the Japanese bombers were over San Francisco last night, and he complained and was very angry with the city for not complying with his orders to black out, and blackouts became a way of life. Here's some ads for blackout paint. You could go down and buy your blackout paint. This was life under fear. Some of those signs that you see all over your retail districts now, talking about various restrictions that apply to this COVID thing. These are similar artifacts from that time. Of course, your best friend is your Philco. You could listen to your radio and get entertained and get the latest information, or you could go to the Sky Room at the Empire Hotel. And there was no blackouts because they painted the windows black. But there was a serious side to all of this. Where could it have been that the Japanese were actually planning to attack the West Coast? Well, this is a letter that was written to the chief of the LA Water Bureau. And it was written by a guy from the Japanese consulate. He would like information that will explain every point of your system, including reservoirs, water supply, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And this was a document that turned up during an investigation of the Japanese espionage ahead of the war. Another interesting document that turned up was this. This was a detailed plan for attacking various points in the Bay Area and in the Central Valley. So this thing was very real. Question that comes up then is, were we ready? And were we ready for a Japanese attack? Many of you will recognize General Joe Stilwell, who later became famous in the China-Burma-India theater. He was the commander of the southern sector of the Western Defense Command, which meant California. And he wrote in his diary, and I'm going to glance down here at the quote. He wrote, on December 11th, 1941, the Japanese could have landed anywhere on the coast, and after our handful of ammunition was gone, they could have shot us like pigs in a pen. And that was the state of our defenses. So let's go over that a little bit. This is where the Army was situated. You see the one regular Army division and a National Guard division at Fort Lewis, another similar pairing at Camp Roberts and Fort Ord, and that was about all there were. There were 2 divisions, and according to Stilwell, they had a whopping total of 6 tanks, and those would have been M3 Stuarts. Oh, what about the Navy? Well, this is the Navy had on the entire West Coast. This was what was left of the Pacific Fleet after 8 battleships went away at Pearl Harbor. There was 1 in dry dock up at Bremerton. That's the top of the map. And then how many carriers? There were 0. How many heavy cruisers? There were 0. How many light cruisers? Well, there was 1, but it was in dry dock. 16 destroyers, but 2 of them were in dry dock. For comparison, the Japanese had 6 carriers at the Pearl Harbor attack, 2 battleships, 2 heavy cruisers, a light cruiser, and 9 destroyers. And then what about our air forces? Well, the essential fact here is that the entire U.S. Army Air Force's interceptor strength for the entire West Coast was half of what the Japanese had at Pearl Harbor. So what did they do with it? Was there a real Japanese naval threat out there? Well, I guess the punchline there is that there was. Take, for example, the week of December 18th to 24, 1941. On your screen here, you see in white all of the ships that were attacked on the West Coast that week, and in yellow are the 3 that were sunk just that week. So the Japanese were attacking. This is a photo of the tanker Omidio. It was torpedoed between Crescent City and Eureka on December 20th. This picture was taken on December 20th, a couple of days after it was attacked and destroyed. It floated around for a while. There's still wreckage up there. 2 days before Christmas, this was a fantastically dramatic thing. The SS Montebello was destroyed and sunk within sight of Highway 1 near Cambria. And here's a newspaper article about that. This is why people were panicked. They were seeing this stuff in the papers, and it was it was starting to scare people. Here's the Albuquerque paper writing some of the same thing. Okay, fast forward to February 1942, and this is when the I-17 shelled the refinery complex down at Goleta near Santa Barbara, and that certainly got everybody's attention. Look at the Chronicle. Look at that headline. Sub shells California, and yes, it did. Here's the LA paper. Here's a map that shows exactly where all of that took place, and what you're seeing right around in here is the modern campus of the University of California at Santa Barbara. But the big deal was the Battle of Los Angeles. The Battle of Los Angeles happened just the next night after the I-17 shelled Santa Barbara, and what you had was something very much like that old Spielberg movie, 1941, with John Belushi. Generally regarded as a terrible movie, but it could have been so much better, because the truth of this thing, the reality of what actually happened, included UFO reports. It was pretty amazing what went on that one night. And here's another newspaper report, a fantastic picture of all of those searchlight beams concentrating on one thing in the sky. Well, what really happened during the Battle of Los Angeles? Well, anti-aircraft gunners cut loose and fired 1,400 rounds, and the only things that were hit were people's houses and property from spent anti-aircraft shells falling. And were there really airplanes in the sky? Well, the next day, the Secretary of War Stimson, he said probably. Army Chief of Staff George Marshall said there were 15 enemy airplanes at least. But the Navy said it was all a false alarm. There were no airplanes over Los Angeles last night. Navy Secretary Frank Knox said it's just jittery nerves. And then the LA Times responded to that and took him to task. And how dare you say that our air raid was a phony? And so it was. This led to an amazing series of conspiracy theories about what did the Navy know that the Army didn't know, and vice versa. Here's the Army insisting that the alarm was real, and there's still a lot of talk about that. All those conspiracy theories, and yes, there was a huge balloon-like object floating through the sky, and I've talked to numerous people who saw that thing, and they insist it was not a balloon. So the conspiracy, or the UFO buffs, have had a lot of fun with that. Okay, June 1942, the I-25 comes back to shells Fort Stevens, Oregon. The Army withheld fire. Why? Well, they said that they didn't want to give away their positions, but they were shining their searchlights on the submarine, so that would have certainly given away their position. Oh well, okay. Then they said that they were worried about the range. Well, they had 16-inch guns at Fort Stevens, and they knew that the deck gun on a submarine was a 5-inch gun, so they easily had the range and didn't return fire. So I'll just leave that as just another conspiracy theory. So this is a quick look at the continuing attacks against the West Coast. This is up in the mouth of Puget Sound, another submarine attack. But then this was June, but then in September, that's when things really started to heat up. That's when the air attacks against the West Coast started. So they started with this Yokosuka E-14 that was launched from the deck of the I-25, And what was the target? Well, here's a good shot of it of one of those float planes. They carried them in a watertight container on the deck, and then they turned them loose. And there was the pilot of this particular one, a guy named Nobuo Fujita. And Fujita apparently had the idea that what he really wanted to do was attack Southern California aircraft plants, but they told him to come up with something a little less ambitious, and so his idea was to drop incendiaries on the forests of the Northwest, and he didn't really count on how wet and damp those forests are, but he actually made 2 incendiary air raids against southwestern Oregon in September of 1942. And started one small fire that was put out, and his other bombs fell in such a damp area that they didn't start a fire. But he tried, and then after the war, the tempers cooled, and he was invited to come to Oregon. He expected that he was going to be killed, but he wasn't, and he was welcomed, and he actually presented his family's samurai sword to the city of Brookings. So that was not the only air attack against the West Coast during the war. Many of you may have heard of the Japanese balloon bombs, Operation Fugo. Fugo was the operation, and this is what one of those bombs looked like. It was a huge balloon with a basket of incendiary and high explosive payload in the basket. Here's a close-up, and the idea of those was that they could be released from Japan, and they would travel on the jet stream across the North Pacific, and they would come down in the United States and Canada, and that they did. There were around 9,300 launched. 284 are known to have made it. So, as you can see on the map, some of them made it as far as the Mexican border. Some of them made it as far as Texas and Kansas and even Michigan. The largest number were in the Pacific Northwest and in Northern California. But these things are still being found. There was one that was found just a few years ago in British Columbia. So at least 284, probably more than that, made it here. And the sad thing about this is that one of these balloon bombs, and this is in May of 1945, resulted in the only deaths of American civilians in the continental United States from enemy action, or I should say in the contiguous 48 United States. And they were killed in Bly, Oregon on that date. This is the monument to those people who died. What happened was that a preacher named Archie Mitchell and his wife Elsie took a group of kids ages 11 to 14 on a picnic. Nothing more benign than a church picnic, and they happened to see one of these things in a tree, and they poked at it, and it exploded, and it killed everybody in the group except Archie Mitchell. And that was the as it says on the map, the only place on the American continent where death resulted from enemy action during World War II. That excludes the Aleutian Islands, where there was a there was a campaign, military campaign, but they were the only civilians killed by enemy action in the United States during World War II. So that's that'll be the. I see that my time is just about at the end, and so that'll wrap up my talk about the actual attacks that did take place against the United States during World War II, and hope you found it interesting, and hope that my lack of literacy in the Zoom world wasn't a distraction. And thank you all.
Thank you, Bill. That was well done. It was very fascinating. I'm sure there are probably some questions out there. And what I guess I'm going to suggest this time is if you have a question, go ahead and unmute yourself and tell us what your question is, or you can use the chat feature. We'll keep an eye on the chat as well. But if you've got a question, just unmute and let us know. Anybody?
Hey, Bill, this is Roger Bass. I was curious, was there any research into the Japanese thought process on their intent behind those kind of attacks? I mean, clearly they weren't going to be strategic.
Which types of attacks?
Well, even like the balloon attacks. I mean, a lot of attacks, but
well, I think that the thinking behind that was probably very much like the thinking behind the Doolittle raid. You know, the Doolittle raid could really not have done serious strategic damage to the Japanese war machine. It was not really a strategic mission. It was a mission to demonstrate to an enemy that we can attack you at home. Doolittle did a lot less damage to Japan than Yamamoto did to Pearl Harbor, but it was a psychological thing. It was it really it hurt Japanese morale, and it helped American morale. And I think that was the case with the balloon bombs. With the submarine attacks, I think what they had in mind there was something similar to what the German U-boats were doing on the East Coast. They really did want to interrupt the ability to run shipping on the West Coast, and that the Germans were successful on the East Coast. I think they wanted to mimic them. There were a lot of problems with that. So there were so many attacks, and so few successful attacks. When you go through each one by one, it's really amazing.
While we're waiting for another question in the chat, it looks like Jim Ansbro had a question, which is, was there a dud torpedo found at the Golden Gate Bridge?
I have heard that story, but I have never seen any confirmation of that. There were a lot of stories about that sort of thing. There were stories about Japanese submarines having gotten inside through the gate before the submarine nets were put in. I've even heard stories that the Soviets got submarines into San Francisco Bay during the Cold War, but again, I haven't seen any documented confirmation of those.
Well, I'll fill up the void a little bit. I do have a question of my own. See if there are any other questions that come in while I'm throwing out my question, and that is, to your knowledge, what is known about the Naval High Command and their attitude towards these West Coast operations? Was there a contingent like, this is a waste of time, we need these resources somewhere else? So who was pushing for this in the Japanese Navy that got their way to do these things, or what was that circumstance like?
Well, the big strategy for the Japanese And the attack, the occupation of two of the Aleutian Islands and the attack on Midway were part of that. That was part of Yamamoto's big dream to keep to have the battlefront as close to the United States as possible. I have never found any evidence that they actually planned an invasion. In my book, I sort of wargamed a series of possible invasion strategies, landings in Los Angeles area and on the Oregon coast, and in San Francisco, all of it was like the famous story about Singapore, where all the big guns were pointed out to sea, and the Japanese attacked from the north where the big guns weren't. In San Francisco, all of the guns, and you look at all of those gun emplacements all around the Golden Gate, they were all aimed at the Golden Gate. They were all aimed at destroying Japanese shipping, Japanese warships coming through there. But the Japanese could have conducted an amphibious invasion at Ocean Beach without any big guns, and they could have come ashore, and they could. In my scenario, they used stolen cars to come down Fulton, go all the way to City Hall, and there would have been very little to stop them, because Stilwell's Western Defense Command was really a toothless tiger.
Well, they could have landed at Moss Landing, right, where all the liquor smugglers would land.
Yeah, they could have, but it would have been a little bit of a drive to get to San Francisco from there.
Interesting. Any other questions out there? Anyone want to unmute and throw out their question? Jim follows up with a question about captured Japanese spies. What can you tell us about that?
Well, there was quite an interesting story in Puget Sound. The Japanese consulate in Seattle had an annex that was overlooking the channel through which ships came and went from the Bremerton Navy Yard, and that there was quite a lot of activity there until it was stopped. But curiously, the Japanese did not have a major espionage operation. They did have spies, but it wasn't a major operation. Like they had a guy in Hawaii who was very, very important to make it for them to make their plans for Pearl Harbor. But they really didn't have a sophisticated operation on the West Coast, as the Germans had a much more sophisticated espionage program during the First World War than they did during the Second World War on the East Coast, and where there gets to be a bit of a problem in the talking about Japanese espionage is that so many Japanese Americans got swept up in this thing because of the fear of Japanese spies. Hand in hand with all of those submarine attacks, there were the newspapers are just overflowing with reports of, well, I saw somebody with a flashlight out on the beach just before the submarine attacked that ship, and the FBI and the local police chased down so many of those, and I never was able to find any instance where any of those were actually true. So I think that really backfired for Japanese Americans.
In your research on the bombs that came across on balloons, what were the specs on those? How heavy were these things? Mike Singer is asking that.
Yeah, I don't have a. We're talking about a couple hundred pounds here, and there were and they were mainly incendiaries, although they did have explosives, but they were and they had actually had different components. There were some that were more incendiary, some were explosives, but balloons were too small to carry a substantial bomb.
Yeah,
So incendiaries would have done more damage.
Okay. A.G. Suzuki asks, did people worry about an attack or military action of any kind later in the war, or was this all pretty much in the first 6 months or so?
Well, the air attacks, Fujita's air attacks were in September, so that was 10 months into the war. Most of the submarine attacks, well, I would say there were submarine attacks, a couple of them into the fall of 42, but mainly they were between December and February, and then they resumed in June in a much scaled back way. The balloon bombs, the dates on those, the first ones were launched around November of 1944, and they did not suspend the launching of those things until April of 45. So that was definitely a second act.
Yeah, I was noting on that the memorial, it said 1945, and I figured, wow, it must have been an unexploded bomb, but they were doing it quite late.
Yeah, it was. Well, it was an unexploded bomb, but it potentially had been there for a month or 6 weeks, not for years.
Right.
And I don't know of an instance where anybody was hurt after the war with one of those things. The weather and humidity would have degraded them.
Was there an attempt to try to account for them or find them so that there weren't going to be these unexploded, like in Britain after the?
Yeah, they did. Well, the Pacific Northwest is if you look at a map, circa 1945, was well over 90% non-populated areas, so mountains and forests. So there was no guidance system on those things. The only guidance was knowing that the jet stream would carry them over here, and the mechanism would allow them to start falling when they got here, and also the gas in the balloon would eventually play out and they would fall. But there was really no guidance system, so they didn't concentrate on cities. They just came over.
If someone wants to read more about this and read your book, where are you selling it, on Amazon, or how do you?
Yeah, it is. It's available on Amazon, and the title is Panic on the Pacific, and you can contact me at my website, which is my name, which you can see on the screen there with no space in between, the two words .com. So just myname.com, and there's links to all my books there, and contact information for me if you have any questions, you can get in touch.
Well, awesome. It looks like we're finishing up here. I don't see any more questions, so I'm going to assume there aren't any, unless somebody has something to chime in with by unmuting. But if not, I would say thank you, Bill Yenne, for joining us tonight and being our guest here on Hill or Hangar Talk. And if you want to give him a rousing round of applause, you can do so this way, or use the little reaction buttons on your screen at the bottom of your Zoom window.
Yeah, I see a thumbs up and a few yellow hands. Yeah, I see David Detweiler. He's doing actual thumbs up.
So thank you, Bill, for coming to visit us today, and thank you everyone else for joining us tonight. Don't forget, we do have coming up in 2 weeks on July 1st, a Hangar talk on aviation museums in Europe, presented by Heyman Tam. And our own very lovely Hiller Aviation Museum will be actually open on Saturday, June 27th. So in another week or so, we look forward to seeing you at the Hiller Aviation Museum. Thank you, everybody. Have a good night.
Thank you.
Thanks, Roger. We'll see you later. Thanks, everybody.